Now let's take a look at what all of this anatomy looks like in practice. I've taken a few images from the new Masters Academy, drawn them as I normally would, except now instead of working in charcoal, I used a fountain pen. The reason for this is, well, first of all, it makes it a little bit easier to see. For me, it's a little bit more fun. I have to keep this entertaining for myself. But just to let you know that this really could be done in any medium using any two colors. Okay, so I've got my inking out of the way. Now it's time to stop looking at the model and start looking at my anatomy charts. I'm going to lay over my muscles and put in my anatomical landmarks. I think it's always better to start with your anatomical landmarks first, simply because they're going to give you clues as to where to place your muscles. So let's take a look at the arm on the left and see if we can identify some of our important anatomical landmarks. All right, well, here, this little shadow represents our clavicle. We've got a clavicle here. Pardon my handwriting, it's not particularly clear. This little bump is clearly the end of the clavicle. That's going to be the acromion process. What else? This little depression here is the scapular spine. And now let's work our way down. Right here, where you can see the curvature of the deltoid go into the center of the arm, right at this point, that's the insertion point of the deltoid. It sits in the upper third of the humerus, which starts in the middle of the shoulder and ends right about here. So that's going to be the insertion point. Point of the deltoid. This little bump is the olecranon. That's the elbow bone. This little furrow right here, which lines up along the same horizontal, is the lateral epicondyle. That's the outside part of the humerus on the bottom. The lateral epicondyle. Okay, let's work our way down. This little groove here is really, really important because it represents the furrow of the ulna. So we know that the ulna starts at the olecranon, that's the very top of the ulna, and ends at the styloid process right here. So our ulna is going to run all the way down the length. Ulna is very important because it separates the flexors on this side from the extensors on this side. So we're going to label that. That is the ulnar furrow. And then the styloid process of the ulna. We saw how important that little bump was when we were talking about pronation and supination. Process of the ulna. Okay, I think that covers all of the landmarks we're looking for. Now let's start putting in our anatomy. So I've got this fantastic double-sided fountain pen that has two different colors on each side. I've got black on one side and red on the other side. Not specifically for anatomy study, but simply I enjoy this combination of colors. Okay, let's take a look. Well, we have our deltoid, and we can see distinctly the three parts of it. The anterior part of the deltoid, which originates at the clavicle, running this way, like this. The posterior part, which is going to run from the scapular spine, running this way, like this. And then, on this particular model, we see the lateral part of the deltoid. So we see the three distinct bundles, and I'm going to indicate them using hatch marks, sort of indicating the direction of the muscle fibers. And then I'm aiming for the insertion point right here. All right, so let's label this in red. We've got the deltoid. What else do we have? Well, we see the three distinct heads of the triceps. So here we have the lateral head, which runs to the halfway point. then at the halfway point turns into tendon and attaches itself to where? The olecranon. Then we have the long head, which runs a little bit further down this way, the long head of the tricep here. And then just below it, we have the medial head of the tricep running this way, like this. Okay, so this is the triceps altogether. Triceps, but we have the lateral head, 2, we have the long head, and then 3, we have the medial head. So here's our lateral, here is our long head, here is the medial head. Okay, on this side we have the brachialis muscle and our bicep. So we know that the bicep originates at the coracoid process, runs straight down this way, like this. And then just underneath it, we have our brachialis muscle that actually sits on the lower half of the humerus. So here is our biceps brachii. We can't see the long head, all we can see is the lateral head. And then here we have our brachialis. There's an I in there, brachialis. And then running at the lower third of the humerus, lining up vertically with the insertion point of our deltoid, we have our brachioradialis muscle. That's going to run this way, like this. And then, because it runs to the thumb, the brachioradialis always aligns with the thumb. It's going to wrap around and then run along the side of the arm and then disappear. Now it's going to run on the opposite side, so you can't really see the brachialis past this little point here. Brachioradialis. But we can see our very long muscle with a very long name, the extensor carpi digitorum longus, which runs this way. Is a little more visible from the back, but also starts disappearing, wrapping around and attaching itself to the ball of thumb, which we can't see. It's obscured by the palm of the hand. So this is our extensor carpi digitorum longus. Then we see a distinct fold running this way. This is the extensor carpi digitorum brevis. It's going to run all the way along the upper portion here, like this, and then also attaching itself to the thumb. It's a little more visible from this view. This is the extensor carpi digitorum brevis. Again, forgive my handwriting, it's not particularly clear. Then, below our brachioradialis, the extensor carpi digitorum longus, extensor carpi digitorum brevis, we have our flexor group, all of which originate in the lateral epicondyle. This is the lateral epicondyle here. Bulge in the upper half, this way, like this. Thin out in the lower half, turn into tendon, and start fanning out towards the fingers past the wrist. These are our extensor group. So we're going to mass them all together. The extensors, the extensor group. And then the ulna separates our extensor group from our flexor group. So this is why that ulnar furrow, that depression that runs from the olecranon to the styloprosthesis of the ulna, is so important because it divides those two groups. So on this side, we have muscles that run all the way inside the forearm, turn into tendon at the wrist, and then fan out towards the fingers in the palm of the hand. That's going to be your extensor group. What else? Well, we have our abductor pollicis longus. So that's responsible for this little rounded bump towards the bottom of the wrist. Our abductor pollicis longus. Okay, so I'm going to do a few more of these. I'm going to first start off by identifying what landmarks I'm seeing. Then, once I've got the landmarks labeled, that's going to help me place where the muscles actually go. So I'm going to do that in the next part of the tutorial. Okay, I'm going to try this one, starting with the anatomical landmarks. Okay, so we have a slightly complicated view here. Here I can see the bicep going in, and then this little groove is created by the coracobrachialis muscle. That's a really long muscle that runs through the coracoid process and then transitions into the brachialis muscle. That's a muscle though, that's not an anatomical landmark. Let's look for our anatomical landmarks. So here we have our acromion, and then the clavicle. Here we have the inside, the medial epicondyle of the humerus. The humerus. We have this little bump right here, which is the olecranon. Olecranon, which is the very top of our ulna and runs to the styloid process. So from the olecranon to the styloid, that's all the ulna bone, the ulna. Styloid of ulna. What other landmarks? Well, the insertion point of the bicep, which is going to be right about here. That's another landmark. Bicep. Okay, we've got our landmarks. Now let's start going into our muscles. Okay, so you've got the deltoid clearly here. So it's running from the clavicle, the outer third of the clavicle here, and then wrapping over the bicep and attaching on the opposite side here. So we've got our deltoid muscle here. Just trying to show the muscle strands, the direction the muscle is going, and where it inserts. Okay, so here, as previously mentioned, we've got our coracobrachialis muscle. This muscle is only visible when the arm is lifted. So let's label that. Deltoid and coracobrachialis. Here we have the bicep. And then just right underneath, we have our brachialis muscle. So here is our bicep and our brachialis muscle. What else are we seeing? Okay, so we're seeing, this is a supinated view. So we're seeing mostly the flexors here on the inside. So here we can identify all the flexors that run along the ulna, turn into tendon towards the wrist, and then fan out to the fingers. So this is going to be our flexor group right here. Flexors. And then this bump is our brachioradialis, and then that second bump is our extensor carpi radialis longus. So these muscles start here, like this, and then start running a little bit to the inside of the wrist and attach right about here. So this is going to be the brachioradialis. And then right behind it Again, running to this little part right here is our extensor carpi radialis longus. I really feel it's important to know the names of the muscles because knowing the name is a big part of actually understanding what you're seeing. So sometimes when I'm drawing, I'm actually looking at the muscle and asking myself, what is the name of it? It helps me understand where it is. Okay, then we have another bump here, which is our abductor pollicis longus. Abductor pollicis longus. What else? We have a little bit of the triceps here, so this is going to be the medial head of the tricep, which runs to the olecranon here. And then here we have our latissimus dorsi. Here are my completed anatomy studies. A few points to keep in mind when you're doing these. First of all, choose a range of arm poses. Choose one with a bend, choose one that's in pronation, choose one that's in foreshortening. So you're practicing your anatomy as it actually looks like in real life, in practice. Every time you encounter a model, the anatomy is going to be a little bit different. The muscles are going to be slightly different shapes, different degrees of development. Sometimes they're going to be obscured with subcutaneous fat. By choosing a range of poses and working from a range of models, little by little, you start developing an instinct for where your anatomical landmarks are and where your insertion origin points are. So, absolutely do copies of anatomy charts. They're really, really important. But this particular practice, where you're starting from observation and then putting a layer of anatomy, of muscle and anatomical landmark on top, is more useful probably than just doing charts alone. Doing this over time is going to really greatly increase your anatomical understanding.